Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Down Syndrome Center podcast. As always, I'm your host, Dr. Kishore Velody, and today we have a very unique podcast that we have definitely never done before. And I'm going to let our guest kind of explain a little bit more about what we're going to be talking about today when it comes to military families and what are the things that are out there for our families who serve in our military. For those of you who do serve in the military, before I even forget, thank you for your service to our country and appreciate all that you do. But for those of you who are in the military and have a child with Down syndrome, I hope that you find this podcast to be helpful. So before we get too far, I'd like to go ahead and have you all introduce yourselves. Rebecca, if you wouldn't mind starting, and then Austin after that. So Rebecca, who are you? What do you do? Why do you love working with this community?
Sure. My name is Rebecca Emerson, and I am retired Air Force. My spouse is active duty Army, and I am here because in 2017, our son Winston was born with Down syndrome. He had a prenatal diagnosis, and that compelled me to volunteer with Exceptional Families of the Military, and I also volunteer with DSDN and moderate their military group. I did that because I found out that it can be very difficult navigating the bureaucracy of the military's exceptional family member program. And I wanted to help. And I also saw Austin testify around the same time as I was retiring, which I'm sure she's going to talk about. But just very briefly, EFM, we are a nonprofit and we help military families navigate the bureaucracy of EFMP. We have military support groups, all online, all virtual. We do one-on-one assistance where we help people with compassionate reassignments, which means assigning them where they could get the right medical care. And we also do advocacy.
Awesome. Thank you. And I'm sure we're going to get into more details specifically about that. But before we forget, Austin, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself as well?
My name's Austin Carrigg. I am an active duty Army spouse. My husband's been active duty for more than 20 years. I think we just quit counting once we hit the retirement number. Um, I have three kids who are enrolled in EFMP, and my littlest one is 11. She has Down syndrome. She joined our family very differently than a lot of families because we adopted her knowing that she had Down syndrome and a prenatal diagnosis, and she is the light of our lives. So as we've gone down this journey of parenting a child who has Down syndrome, which happened very quickly for us, she was in our home within 2 weeks of finding out about her. So we were not prepared, like I think a lot of people, like Rebecca probably was when she received her prenatal diagnosis. We just kind of jumped in feet first and thought, we'll survive this somehow. And so along this path, I realized that there weren't enough supports for families like mine who had little ones with a lot of medical issues and with Down syndrome. And so I jumped into advocacy. And in 2020, the House Armed Service Committee held a hearing on the EFMP program. And there were so many families there. They had to open up a second viewing room. It was really shocking to the staffers and the congressmen and congresswomen who put on the hearing. And after that, I woke up the next day to thousands of messages across my social media platforms. Some people were saying, your story really got me, but a lot of them were families, just like mine, who said, your struggle is my struggle. It may not have been the same, but I'm right there with you. Either how can I help you fix this, or can you help me fix what's happening with our lives? And I realized pretty quickly that we needed an organization to pull us all together. There was no nonprofit in the space that served families specifically like ours that were enrolled in EFMP. And so I launched EFM. Along the way, this journey has led us to different paths, like Rebecca said. So we keep adding programming to what we're doing to support families. And one thing that Rebecca didn't touch on is that we also support our Coast Guard families who are enrolled in the special needs program. So if you hear us say EFMP, Coast Guard families, you're part of us too. So we're going to support you and help you. That's what we're doing every day.
That's so great. Thank you. And I feel like between the military and between medical people, we use more acronyms than probably anybody in the world. So for our listening audience, I know you've mentioned it to some extent, but as you think about EFMP and EFM, just give us a really basic, like what are those two terms like and who are these groups for? Who are they serving?
So EFMP is Exceptional Family Member Program, and SNP is the Special Needs Program for the Coast Guard. So EFMP is for Department of Defense military families. And it is a mandatory program, congressionally mandated for enrollment. And the goal of the program is really an assignments tool. So it is primarily used to ensure that families get stationed where they can receive medically necessary care for a variety of diagnoses. So Down syndrome is a diagnosis that requires enrollment in EFMP, and there's a long list of others, but we're just talking about Down syndrome now. So, and EFM exists because there are some gaps in the DoD program, honestly. So, we ultimately would love to be out of a job because we're all volunteers for this. But we try to fill the gaps and support for some of our families because as many people with Down syndrome know, that have faced the diagnoses, it changes things. And there can be other specialists that are required, heart specialists and ENT specialists and things like that. There are 3 parts to the program. There's the assignment processing where you have to fill out paperwork outlining what specialists you need and maybe what therapists you need. There's also a medical side where you are covered by the military health benefit TRICARE. And if you are enrolled in EFMP, you can enroll in supplemental care called TRICARE Echo. And I just want to put a plug in that if your loved one has Down syndrome that you're taking care of, enroll in EFMP, make sure you enroll in TRICARE Echo, because even if your baby is day 1, you might not know what you need, but the time when you do need it, you don't want to fill out a bunch of paperwork in it to take a long time. And then the third part of EFMP is the family support side, where various bases provide support in finding local resources. They should be able to connect you with a school liaison to help you, and possibly maybe a military lawyer that could help with IEPs. So this is a critical component for our families, since we move on average every 2 to 3 years. And the states can be very, very different in how they approach a variety of things.
So that, if I'm understanding correctly, and please tell me if I've got this wrong, but for families who are enrolled in this program, the military, like where they're stationed or where they're deployed, it will take into account the fact that they have a child who may have medical or therapy needs and things like that. Am I getting that correct?
Sort of. They try to make sure that you're assigned to a location that has the medical care that's available for your family.
Okay.
The reality is you're going to have families listening to this saying that didn't happen, right? We have to remember the program is ran by human beings and mistakes are made. And there are times where our families are stationed places that medical care is not available. And then the family has to make the choice on whether to move together or to take the financial burden that's going to exist and split their family so their service member can go where they need to go and the family can stay at their previous location or go home maybe to family. So the intent is to try to make sure, but the reality is there's no guarantee.
Got it. Okay, thank you. That makes sense. Now, let's say, just taking into account a hypothetical situation, somebody who's in the military and discovers that they're going to have a child with Down syndrome, or perhaps they find out after the baby is born. What are things that they should do soon after receiving that diagnosis, whenever it is, whether prenatally or after the baby's born?
So they will go to their local EFMP medical office and speak with them. So every branch does a little bit differently. I'd highly encourage you to go to your local office because we are rolling out new processes. And as they roll out, we don't want you thinking, today I'm going to tell you, you go online. So the Army has Enterprise EFMP and you fill out your EFMP packet there because things are rapidly changing. I would encourage you to touch base with your local EFMP office, which is going to be at your military hospital. Tell them that you are in the process of either my child was just born and I need to be enrolled, or I'm pregnant or my spouse is pregnant. And I know Currently, they cannot be enrolled. So I know they cannot be enrolled, but I need to make sure that we are not stationed to a location that medical care is not available. Rebecca, do you want to explain a little bit more on the prenatal diagnosis because you've been there?
Sure, no problem. So a prenatal diagnosis is a bit tricky because, a lot of complications can happen in utero, and you might need better medical care right away, right? There is no formal mechanism within the military to station you someplace because you're pregnant, because you can't enroll somebody until after they're born. This is a problem we are advocating for it to change, because it's really up to your leadership to help you at that point. So I had a prenatal diagnosis. I was in the middle of moving when I had a prenatal diagnosis. And it was very stressful, but my leadership did work with me and get me I was going to a location with adequate, or more than adequate, actually, excellent medical care. But this is not the story of every family, right? They may have orders that to a remote location. And it's very hard, as I'm sure you know, with a prenatal diagnosis, because you don't have a crystal ball and you know more the further along you get. And it might be at a critical point when you have to move. So my advice to people listening is, if you are facing a prenatal diagnosis, to reach out to your assignments team, reach out to your leadership, let them know immediately what is going on. And you might need some medical folks to back you up on what is going on, to explain it to your leadership so you can get to a place with the right care.
Great. And it sounds like, and the words come up a couple of times, even as we've been talking this morning here about advocacy and advocacy efforts. Are there some that you would like to highlight for our audience, some advocacy efforts that EFMP has done?
So EFM has worked on a couple of issues over the years that have been successful and some that haven't. One of our more recent wins, I say more recent, 3 or 4 years ago, we were able to get TRICARE EGO's respite care hours increased from 16 up to 30. We're still waiting on the Department of Defense and the Defense Health Agency to implement that change in hours, which I know that everybody listening is thinking, what? It's been 3 or 4 years. This should be done. We're hopeful that it's done before my spouse retires, but we'll see. We are currently working on legislative fixes for prenatal diagnosis, largely thanks to this issue because Rebecca brought it to EFM and told us all about it. We are also working for a change in EHHC. So our extended healthcare option is part of the ECHO program that we're telling you about, and it's for families that need nursing care. Currently under the program, the primary caregiver cannot work outside the home, in the home, or be seeking an education. So for families like Rebecca's who have dual military service members, single parent service members, we often see that somebody is forced to get out of the military. And in other instances, such as mine, I'm not allowed to work and receive pay for the work that I do. So we're forcing families to be single income families in a world that really requires two incomes to comfortably survive. So we've been working really hard on that for the last couple of years. ECHO was created by Congress to replace the need for home and community-based waivers. So it really is in contradiction to what most home and community-based waivers require, which is that the primary caretaker be employed. And Rebecca, I know that you experienced, childcare issues as a family who had a little one with Down syndrome, and you were dual military. Do you want to tell us?
Sure, yes. As we know, it can be hard to find a daycare for children with Down syndrome. And it just can be difficult in general. So if you want to find care on base, which our care centers are called CDCs, if you want to find care on base, there is a process you can go through for each base that you fill out a bunch of paperwork, maybe a team meets, and they decide whether or not your child can fit into their daycare model. And of course, I'm talking about young children, but also the after school programs and things like that. There is that same process. It is hard to get support for EFMP families in those centers, to be quite frankly. And some people can get support and others can't. If you're facing complex medical care issues, it can be even more difficult. Anything like a feeding tube or any kind of extra nursing care can make it very difficult. I'm not saying this to scare you away. There are places that you can find. I found after Winston was born, I did find a Easter Seals type model of a place in North Carolina called Sandhills Children's Center that worked for us. And I did get a subsidy for help with that because the on-base care recognized that they could not meet the needs of my child. And just for clarity, Winston is very healthy and has zero issues when it comes to medical needs. So, and he still couldn't be supported in that model. So it can be very difficult for families.
So sounds like a lot of existing advocacy and ongoing advocacy that you're able to provide. So that's great. Thank you for what you're doing for the families. As you think about different resources that you might want to make sure families are aware of, certainly in our show notes, I can include some things, but are there specific resources that you would like to make sure to highlight today on the podcast?
Sure. I would like to mention, of course, our support groups, but that is all diagnoses. All diagnoses are there. There's also DSCN has a specific military group, so that is only military families with Down syndrome. It's Down Syndrome Diagnosis Network, their Facebook group. They also have a pregnancy group. DSDN has a pregnancy group. Our support groups are either you can join like the Air Force support group. If you are in the Air Force, you can go to our flagship group, which is family support. And people do a lot of crowdsourcing in those groups. And it's great to have that online resource because you don't know, like, hey, have you guys ever been to Fort Liberty, North Carolina? Tell me about the therapist there. Tell me about the coverage, you know. Also, I would like to mention for resources that there are things that, you know, as you progress in the military and your children get older, and there is something called Survivor Benefit Plan through the military. And they brief you on it when you're getting ready to retire. So this is for retirees. And I just want to let everyone know that you really need to listen to that briefing and talk to, you know, the people given that briefing, because there's a child only option that you can check. And it's if you check that child only option and you have what is considered an incapacitated child, that definition by the military, I'm not saying that my son is incapacitated, but if Down syndrome does qualify, you check child only on there and you pay, I don't know, it's not that much. I think I pay $15 a month out of my retirement check. And when I pass, half of my retirement check will go to Winston in perpetuity. So, you know, it's a really huge benefit that I don't think a lot of people understand, that it's so much less to check child only on that. Your neurotypical children, my other child would get it too, but he ages out,
I see.
you know, when he becomes an adult. So it can provide you with some security in the future. So I always like to mention that as a resource. And also as a resource, the military can sometimes help you with estate planning. They might not be able to do it all, but you can get certain things done and they might be willing to work with another lawyer to do those special needs trusts, all those things that our families need. And then lastly, there's this thing called secondary dependency with the military. And this is to continue your TRICARE coverage past adulthood. So normally you can, for your neurotypical children, you can enroll them until they're graduated from college and they're covered under your insurance plan. But if you have, and of course, this may be different for every family, and some families may not need TRICARE, right? But others may need it. And to continue on it, you have to go through a very complicated process every 4 years to prove that your child, like you have to count up how many peanut butter and jelly sandwiches you make and stuff like that.
Okay.
It's a very convoluted process. So I'm just mentally preparing people for that now. Of course, we always hope that that will change, but if you need that medical care, I would also look into where you retire those state Medicaid programs and waiver programs too, if you can control where you want to live at the end of your military career. Because I don't think Austin mentioned this, but the reason why they created ECHO for us is because we're hopelessly never able to get onto a waiver because of the waiver list. So, I moved to North Carolina. It's a 10-year list, and I only lived there waiting list for 2 years. And then I'm in another state, so there can be complications. But I'll kick it over to you, Austin, for some more thoughts and resources.
Yes, so the waiver wait lists are a problem. We know that. But if you are a family that is very, very lucky to have gotten onto a waiver, one state that everybody always says, not this state for medical care, but Florida will allow military families to go to the top of the wait list if you're on a Medicaid waiver in another state. So if retirement is around the corner and you are panicking because we're telling you things you didn't know, consider Florida, even if it's just short term, because you will automatically get on Medicaid there under a waiver for your child. Unfortunately, they do call it incapacitated adult status for secondary dependency. So we know it sounds dirty. We're pretty disgusted by the wording too. But when you go to search for it, that is what it's called. And you need to keep receipts for a year prior. So if you're there at that, like you're at 18 and you're trying to figure out what's going on, please start keeping receipts because you have to prove that you provide 51% of their care or more. And unfortunately, the military only counts your incapacitated adult child as 50% of a person when it comes to that calculation. So when Rebecca says you need to count your peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, you really do have to count those peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. It's really unfortunate. So we don't want to scare you, but we want to make sure that people are very well prepared. I know a lot of military families are going to throw daggers at me when I say this, but Military One Source can be a helpful place to find some different resources. I can like feel it coming through already. Everybody listening, like screaming about like, oh, stop telling us about Military One Source. But there are a handful of things on there that are really, really great. And one of them, they have a binder for your child. You can download it. It's a special needs binder. That's what they call it, not us. You download it and it helps you keep track of all your information. On our website, we have a complimentary addition to that because we know a lot of families need things that aren't in that binder. So that's also free. You can go and download it. And I will give one last plug. I know that a lot of families lately have talked about hypoglycemia. I feel like that's been a really hot topic. There is a patient organization out there called Ketotic Hypoglycemia International. And for families that have had this recent diagnosis, maybe it's just because I've been contacted by a lot of families recently myself because our little girl has it, but they have an online support group. And I know that at least 25% of the families in there have a little one with Down syndrome. So if you're trying to figure out where do I go for medical care when I PCS and you can't find it in our group, I'd really recommend it's an international group, but I'd recommend joining.
Okay. Wow. Thank you. This has been a great podcast. I mean, I think probably many of us listening to the podcast, and certainly myself included, really were not aware of all of the things that go on within a military family when they receive a diagnosis. So thank you for shedding this light for all of us, and thank you for joining me on the podcast today. And to all of our listeners, and especially those who serve in the military, again, I say thank you for your service, for your family members who serve in the military. Thank you, and for both of you as well on the podcast with me today. For our listeners, as you know, we always are looking for podcast ideas or topics that you would like us to cover. And so this topic actually came out of that, where someone reached out to me and said they were interested in this information. So please, if you have information you would like us to address on this podcast, please go to and email us at downsyndromecenter@chp.edu. As always, if you'd like to join us in what we do here at the center, including this podcast, go to givetochildrens.org/Down Syndrome Center. But until next time, bye-bye.